Guys, welcome to the show. I'm I'm doing something a little different today. Um, I'm going to show probably Alexandra. She's really great, and you should go follow her over on YouTube. Her shows, I've been watching her for years. Truly amazing, amazing piece of work, body of work that she's done over these years. Way, way ahead of my level, and enjoy it. I will leave it at that. So let me bring her on. And here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexandra. This is part 2 of the programmed series where we will be discussing how to identify cults and ritual abuse. Now, due to censorship, I'm going to be abbreviating that as RA. If you have not done so already, please watch the previous parts of this series before continuing. Previously, we discussed the many avenues of social conditioning and how our need for validation and community can be used against us. We left off with exploring the 6 conversion techniques used by cults and organizations to gain converts and control thoughts. In this video, we will take a look at what constitutes a cult and some basic tactics cults use and a few examples of these techniques. Here, we are not talking about broad-scale mass programming. We're going to start looking into organized programming. As previously stated, you'll be hearing a mix of my voice and my friend's voice throughout this series.
First, let's define terms. What is a cult? A group or movement exhibiting great or excessive devotion or dedication to some person, idea, or thing, and employing unethical manipulation or coercive techniques of persuasion and control, isolation from former friends and family, debilitation, use of special methods to heighten suggestibility and subservience, powerful group pressures, information management, suspension of individuality or critical judgment, promotion of total dependency on the group and fear of leaving it. Designed to advance the goals of the group's leaders, to the actual or possible detriment of members, their families, or the community.
What is mind control? Mind control is also known as brainwashing, re-education, coercive persuasion, thought control, or thought reform. The 4 key elements of control are behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions. If these 4 components can be controlled, then an individual's identity can be systematically manipulated and changed. Everyone is familiar with infamous cults, but there are actually more active cults operating around the world than most of us can comprehend. And every active cult...
How do you take 20,000 children in the middle of New York City without anybody seeing? They are being put into buses. They are given certain clothes. Some of them were taken out in boxes. You can call them crates. You can call them caskets of dead people, although they were live children in there.
I mean, we could talk about tunnels all we want. The non-believers will say, where's the proof?
When I go into the tunnels, I can't take my phone, and if you're going to do
seeks to recruit new members. It's an alien lifestyle for many, leading to general unawareness, misinformation, or disbelief. Most survivors rarely talk about their abuse. There are many reasons for this, but some include the fact that they'll feel blamed for staying in an abusive environment, they feel guilt or shame, they fear for their safety, and they fear they will not be believed. If you or someone you know fears for your safety and perhaps is in a cult, please see one of the references left in the description box below for how to safely try to escape.
A remarkable thing about cult mind control is that it's so ordinary in the tactics and strategies of social influence employed. They are variants of well-known social psychological principles of compliance, conformity, persuasion, dissonance, reactance, framing, emotional manipulation, and others that are used on all of us daily to entice us, to buy, to try, to donate, to vote, to join, to change, to believe, to love, to hate the enemy. Cult mind control is not different in kind from these everyday varieties, but in its greater intensity, persistence, duration, and scope. One difference is in its greater efforts to block quitting the group by imposing high exit costs, replete with induced phobias of harm, failure, and personal isolation. Philip G. Zombardo, PhD.
Mind control is the cornerstone of RA. It is the key element in the subjugation and silencing of its victims. Mind control is designed to rob victims of their sense of free will and to impose the will of the cult and its leaders. This is achieved through an elaborate system of grooming, which is often overlooked. Brainwashing, programming, indoctrination, hypnosis, and the use of various mind-altering drugs.
The purpose of the mind control is to compel ritual abuse victims to keep the secret of their abuse, to conform to the beliefs and behaviors of the cult, and to become functioning members who serve the cult by carrying out the directives of its leaders without being detected within society at large. Essentially, these cults and their victims have created an alternate reality within our world. There is the world the general public is a part of, the above-ground world, and then there is the world most never see. The same way the majority of society uses the ClearNet or the index internet, but there is a deep web of unindexed content just beneath the surface. Just because you don't personally experience something does not mean it doesn't exist. Cults, A Bloodstained History by Natasha Tormey says, cults can hide in many places. They are so adept at blending into society and masking their true colors that often their victims do not realize that they were even in a cult until they have escaped it. Nor do they fully comprehend the severity of the brainwashing that they were subjected to until they are finally free of it. What's important to understand about cults is that most lack cultic facades. They do not appear evil or rebellious. They appear as offering something the broken world cannot give. The victim will slowly become entangled in the philosophies and the ways of the cult until the cult becomes their personality. On a larger scale, the majority of humanity holds beliefs that are induced beliefs. The powers that be, whatever it is in a particular case, saw to it that the proper belief should be induced, and people believed properly, as Charles Hoy Fort said. Cults attract victims by offering something money can't buy. Exclusivity, spirituality, knowledge, power, buying into a dream, or a society. Our brains reason, if lots of people already okayed it, and these celebrities are in it, it's gotta be okay. It's been vetted. This fallacy is very dangerous. Cults work in tiered or hierarchical structures. The cult you see from the outside is not the cult you get on the inside. For example, the Church of Scientology presents a facade to the outside world to disguise what in reality is nothing more than a cult built on mind control and destruction of the independence and self-control of those drawn into its sphere. The lawsuit states, members are isolated from the outside world, their access to information is heavily monitored and controlled, and they are subject to physical, verbal, psychological, emotional, and/or abuse and/or assault. For adults, leaving organizations like this can be a financial and emotional nightmare, and children born into cults have a much more difficult time breaking free because their entire personality has been built by the world around them.
Several well-known cults have been accused of ritualized abuse, starvation, and severe corporal punishment. For example, Jonestown, Nexium, Children of God, and the Branch Davidians. The largest mass suicide event in the U.S. was Heaven's Gate. It takes from 8 to 18 months for a young adult after leaving a cult to recreate a sense of personal competence and to feel comfortable in making decisions. River Phoenix was caught between two cults, growing up in the Children of God cult and working in Hollywood. River's family joined the Children of God, now called the Family International, when he was 3. After his parents disaffiliated from the cult, they moved to California and changed the family's last name from Bottom to Phoenix. River died at 23 of an alleged overdose after collapsing in front of the nightclub The Viper Room in West Hollywood, which was then owned by Johnny Depp, on Halloween, October 31st of 1993. Family cults are the same as communal cults, just smaller in scale. Domestic abuse can sometimes fit these criteria. Small and large cults use programming methods on their members. We will be discussing the details of programming later in this series. Whether it's a small familial or communal cult, or a terrorist organization, if you want to ensure the longevity of a cult, you ensure the women are on board and they will instruct the children to be as radical as their fathers, or the leaders.
Parents are the most important people in their children's lives. Children want to be like their parents and do what their parents do. Parents are also the most important teachers for their children. Children learn the most from their parents. Children learn things that their parents try to teach them, such as how to count numbers. Children also learn things by watching their parents and copying what they do. In this way, children sometimes learn things that their parents don't mean to teach them. Children notice every little thing. They watch their parents constantly. They learn good and bad behaviors by watching and listening and imitating. If these parents espouse the views and behaviors of a cult, the child does not grow up questioning them. They think this is normal behavior.
People believe in a false doctrine because they believe in a false authority. They then internalize these false beliefs and modify their behavior accordingly, and the cycle of lies perpetuates themselves. Cult programming is prevalent throughout the world. Covens are similar to cults, but more secretive. Part of the definition of cult is to follow a religion or a semi-religious practice.
The religion promoted by a cult is a deviation and sometimes even a perversion of the religions it's based on, and often also of societal norms. What constitutes a cult? What are the warning signs? This overview can apply to any religious organization or group. Take a moment to read this slide. More specifically, they claim to have knowledge of the truth, but the only way to know it is to join them. You have to state you are leaving and have your name removed. The world outside of the group is a threat. You have to join certain groups or pass tests to be allowed to have more knowledge or join. You are told there is a special purpose or calling in your life, and if you join the group, you will be able to achieve this purpose. If you do decide to leave, they guilt trip you to try and get you to stay, or members of the group can no longer speak with you. Sometimes more violent means are taken. Spiritual abuse is the use of spiritual knowledge to deprive, torture, degrade, isolate, control, or, in rare and extreme cases, even kill others. It is used by evil-minded church and cult leaders to gain advantage or exercise control over others. The type of trauma individuals experience from cults and their leaders is similar to that described by prisoners of war. Some of the methods are love bombing new members, financial control. If a member leaves, they are shunned, and members can't question authority.
If someone's entire family are members of these groups, this makes leaving a monumental undertaking. Many groups, such as the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons, use cult methodologies within their teachings and are considered to be cults by many. The methods used by these groups follow the BITE model by Stephen Hassan. The BITE model is a vehicle for understanding the phenomenon of mind control, not for assessing left or right ideologies or whether a group is benevolent or not. For example, many people categorize the Jehovah's Witnesses as a cult for various reasons. A few are listed below. They use their own special translation of the Bible, which is different from the original texts. They're known to disown, shun, and ignore any friends and family for leaving. They believe God did not create the universe directly. Michael, the archangel, is the only thing which Jehovah created personally. Michael created everything else under Jehovah's direction. They believe that Jesus was Michael, made flesh. Michael, now called Jesus, is second only to Jehovah in power and authority. They do not believe that Jesus is God. Jehovah's Witnesses consider Jesus as the greatest witness of all, inferior to no one except Jehovah himself. Only the 144,000 go to heaven. The rest will live forever in a paradise on earth, never meeting the person who died for them, Jesus Christ. They're not allowed to question the Watchtower's leadership or teaching. They believe salvation is impossible outside of the Watchtower. They claim you need to read the Watchtower's magazines and other material in order to understand the Bible correctly. If you don't read the Watchtower's books, you will, quote, fall into darkness. This was founded by Charles Taze Russell. He was the founder of the Watchtower Society, which subsequently became the Jehovah's Witness movement. If I were to discuss the occult roots behind Charles Taze Russell, it would be an entire video, as his beliefs are parallel to that of Freemasonry's. I encourage you to look into this yourself if you're interested.
Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
It's no surprise so many smokescreens exist around these cults, though. The leader of the anti-Masonic political party in the 1830s through the 1840s turned out to be a Mason. Another interesting topic to research is the similarities between Freemasonry and Mormonism. Just one of many examples would be to compare the text for the oaths for the first 3 degrees in Masonry, entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, with the oaths used in the temple before 1974. Also, consider the similarities between the grips and the 5 points of fellowship. In The Mysteries of Godliness, A History of Mormon Temple Worship by David John Berger, on page 53, Berger places, in 2 columns, the Nauvoo Temple ceremony side by side with the Freemasonry rites and compares the two, so you can note the similarities and differences. Joseph Smith was a Freemason and was into divination. He also read a lot of Hermetic material, which is occult in nature. These are historical facts, not opinions. Anyone can verify this information. Masonry reveres Hermeticism, particularly Egyptian Hermeticism. One example would be to research Swedenborg for more info. Membership in Masonry is purposefully rampant throughout all religious organizations, but a vast majority of newer religions were begun by Freemasons, whereas the older religions were infiltrated by fraternal orders. These were just a few examples of many. But if you suspect a group of being a cult, ask yourself the following questions.
Does the group claim to be a Christian organization or a friend of Christianity, but their teachings misrepresent Christian theology? Most often, the doctrine of salvation by grace alone is misrepresented in a cult's teachings. Is the group characterized by authoritarianism? Are members who slightly disobey punished severely or excommunicated? Can a person think and study for themselves, or do they rely on the group's leader for all of their instruction? Is the Bible misinterpreted in the group's teaching? They may claim to interpret the Bible correctly, but does their biblical interpretation stand up under close examination? Are members of the group subject to psychological, physical, or spiritual harm? When asked, can the group provide an accurate and detailed history of the founders and origin of the organization? Do you sense intimidation or deception within the group or toward outsiders? Is there secrecy?
Fear is the number one identifying tactic. Any organization that requires members to take oaths, vows, and participate in secret rites is a cult. By definition, Freemasonry is a cult. This entire system is set up to be so well hidden that they will never be exposed. Albert Pike states in Morals and Dogma that the lower levels of Masons are deceived. The higher degrees deceive the lower degrees of Masons. The same way a cult leader and the inner group deceive the lower downs and followers. We've discussed Gnosticism in my previous videos, specifically the Mind Game series. Gnosticism hinges on the key principle that salvation is found through knowledge. The basic characteristics of a Gnostic religion include hidden knowledge, a hierarchy, which is generally divided into 3 basic tiers: the enlightened top 1, 2, or 3 leaders, the elect, and the general initiates. The esoteric core, or the top tier, know the purpose of the organization, their role within it, and what it must accomplish. The exoteric followers do not. And the higher someone goes up in the hierarchy, the more hidden knowledge is given. Non-cult churches have been infiltrated by individuals and cult-like groups whose purpose is to gain access to children and vulnerable adults, or to subvert the institution and replace it with its own ideologies. One example is the case of Freemasons infiltrating churches over 100 years ago. I discussed this more in depth in an earlier video I did called An Inconvenient History.
Where you eat is up to you. But what you eat? Now that we can help with. Spice up your sandwich routine with Wawa's new Honey Hot Club sandwiches, ciabattas, and paninis. Gotta have a Wawa.
RA, whether it be organized, religious, or satanic in nature, it takes on many forms. While adults make up a large percentage of victims, the primary targets are often children. Let's start with definitions so we're all on the same page.
What is ritual abuse? The simplest definition is intentionally repeated trauma that gratifies the abuser or group. The term ritual abuse is generally used to mean repeated, extreme, sadistic abuse, especially of children, within a group setting. The group's ideology is used to justify the abuse, and abuse is used to teach the group's ideology. The activities are kept secret from society at large as they violate norms and laws. On the other hand, religious abuse can take as many forms as there are spiritual beliefs. Any faith will have people using that name in ritual abuse. I'd separate the two by saying that religious abuse doesn't have to, but it can, involve these forms, while ritual abuse has to involve those. Then there is ritualistic abuse, which doesn't have to involve an ideology, but rather the abuse happens in a ritualistic manner. If anyone or group uses an ideology to justify abuse, it's ritual abuse. Ritual abuse is a complex crime, and perpetrators are difficult to categorize. The intersection of familial abuse, torture, organized pedophilia, and cultic ritual put such perpetrators in a unique category. Ritual abuse is associated with complex psychological diagnoses, such as complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and a spectrum of dissociative disorders, including dissociative identity disorder.
Abuse is threefold: physical, mental, and spiritual. Please read the official definition of RA here.
There are 3 classification levels for ritualistic cult-like abuse as defined by Finkelher, Williams, and Burns in their research of this type of abuse. The first level is cult-based ritualistic abuse, which includes an elaborate belief system to create a particular spiritual or social structure. Usually, sexual abuse is not the ultimate goal of the perpetrator, but it is used as a tool. The second level is the pseudo-ritualistic abuse, which involves sexual exploitation of the victim. Often the use of costumes and killing of animals are used as a way to intimidate, but are not part of the ideology of the group. The third level is a psychopathological ritualism, which is the ritualistic abuse of children as part of an obsessive or delusional belief system. Why do cults program children? The main reasons are for power, control, and to ensure the survival of the belief system and/or bloodlines of the cult. What are the differences between ritual abuse and cult abuse? Though subtle, some of the main differences between ritual abuse and cult abuse is the duration, planning, control, and secretiveness of what has occurred. Ritual abuse is continuous, sadistic in its nature, linked to the belief system, doctrine of the abusers, and is often organized. Religious trauma, like that of cults, does not hold to these things. For example, a pastor may abuse a child, but it is not related to their religious beliefs. They use their position and authority to abuse. Religious abuse that is not associated with cults differs in that the individual can leave the church if they desire. While in cults or organized abuse organizations, this is often extremely difficult to do. Some of the similarities include having the individual indoctrinated into their belief systems through abusive means such as sleep deprivation, starvation, group thinking, exclusion, and blackmail to keep the group members from leaving. Is this a new phenomenon? How old is ritual abuse? Ritual abuse has existed for longer than the last 20 years. Survivors talk of their childhood experiences of ritual abuse occurring in the 1950s and 60s. Ritually abusive practices within families are often transgenerational, meaning they are practiced by various generations of family members over many years. Evidence derived from court cases and personal accounts indicate ritual abuse existed as far back as the 16th century. The most sensational form of spiritual abuse is satanic ritual abuse. However, it is not the most common. Satanic ritual abuse adds the satanic aesthetic, worship of Satan, the devil, various ancient gods or demons and doctrines. The term Satanism specifically refers to the worship of Satan alleged to have been practiced in France in the latter part of the 19th century, the principles and rites of the Satanists. Current popular usage of the term in the USA, however, covers a broader range of activities including 1. Formal or informal worship of Satan or entities equated with or associated with Satan or with violence, cruelty, and destructiveness. 2. The practice of black magic, i.e. the manipulations of alleged magical forces for destructive ends. 3. Preoccupation with literature, symbols, rituals, or other artifacts and activities associated with Satan or related entities, or with black magic. And 4. Attempts to enhance sexual, criminal, or other activities by participation in rituals associated with the worship of Satan or related entities, or with the practice of black magic. The term Satanism, then, popularly refers to the dark side of occultism. However, the terms malevolent occultism, abusive occultism, and occult-related violence more accurately describe the range of phenomena falling under the Satanism umbrella.
Satanic ritual abuse, or SRA, is often used to represent all categories of spiritual ritual abuse, which would be inspired by the desire to rob, kill, or destroy something worthwhile in a person, especially their freedom of thought. Many groups carrying out SRA do not mention Satan by that name. Now remember that cults follow their own rules and doctrine. The God of the biblical scriptures is not the one these cults are worshipping. This is done to create confusion in the victim and to venerate malevolence above holiness. SRA falls into two categories. There is the abuse where the survivor is used for ritual and spiritual reasons, and that is the only purpose the clan has for them. This type of abuse is typically done by self-identified Satanists or a group of people who follow those beliefs. This form of abuse is rare, but the most thought of and heard of. The second form of SRA is generational. This does involve programming, blood ties, and soul ties. Generational ritual abuse is extremely difficult to break away from, as the families usually have strong ties to the community. Many people have heard that SRA is a myth or a hoax. This suggestion was promoted by many in the media during the 1990s and combined two common errors. Firstly, that RA is only reported within a satanic group, and secondly, that RA simply does not happen. Evidence of RA that does not involve religious or spiritual beliefs is even more extensively documented.
I am here to tell you today that your feelings are valid. Your trauma is valid. Your hurt is your hurt. I discovered BetterHelp 2 years ago and my life changed. You wear these shoes. You know where it hurts. No one can tell you how your shoes hurt you because they are not wearing it for you. If it hurts you, my love, it hurts you. Every human being have different capacity. The capacity you have as a human being is different from the next person. How you react might be completely different, and that's fine because you are you. It is valid. That was a huge aspect of my healing journey because I just felt embarrassed to talk about what I was going through because I felt like it was too light of a situation for me to even
Let's look a bit further. Spiritual abuse can destroy the concept of a loving God, produce estrangement from or an aversion to God, and introduce feelings of worthlessness and hatred of oneself and others in power. During and after the abuse, most victims live in a constant state of terror, mental confusion, and dissociation. RA can occur with virtually any religious ideology, such as forms of Christianity, various occult beliefs, supremacist groups, Eastern religious beliefs, and other esoteric beliefs. RA is by definition not a crime of impulse, but a crime committed with malicious forethought. Some of the most secretive groups described by survivors are the generational cults. Some scholars are convinced that such groups have existed for centuries. Usually, practitioners have been born into the belief system. Members are abused from birth and eventually may become abusers. Their cult activities may coexist with traditional worship. That is, members may publicly practice an established, respected religion. The members are often well known and respected within their larger communities. These generational cults may recruit new members, often from among teens, yet the leadership roles remain within the family. In other words, recruiting fulfills the exoteric circle, but the inner circles, the esoteric core of the organization, is reserved for the transgenerational bloodlines. Some examples of this system are used by the mafia and gangs. Please take a moment to learn about the various types of organized abuse. Links in the description below. Society's attitude towards CSA and exploitation can be summed up in one word: denial. The legal system in the United States and much of the rest of the world is not built for survivors of RA. Now, if you would like more information, I've left links in the description below for resources, evidence, as well as conviction cases. We will also continue to cover this subject in the next part of this programmed series. There are numerous documented cases of RA. There are numerous cults that exist that ritualistically abuse children and adults. Here's a quote from a news article regarding the finders. The link to the FBI Vault's documents regarding the finders is in the description. DC police sources said some of the items seized yesterday showed pictures of children engaged in what appeared to be cult rituals. Officials of the U.S. Customs Service, called in to aid in the investigation, said that the material seized yesterday includes photos showing children involved in bloodletting ceremonies of animals and one photograph of a child in chains. Customs officials said they were looking into whether a CP operation was being conducted. One reason RA may be underdetected is because the signs a survivor experiences may appear as signs of trauma. These include, but are not limited to, the child believes he or she is evil or causes others to be evil, mistrust of others outside the group, a strong fear of God, overly obedient or perfectionistic, strong feelings of shame or guilt, programmed statements or behaviors, sleep problems, or nightmares.
The following lists are comprised of symptoms experienced by survivors in a range of ages. In children ages 0 to 3, excessive fear, sleeping issues, failure to thrive, feeding issues, difficulty swallowing, imaginary friends that misbehave. Children with DID are much more likely to develop imaginary friends at a younger age, 2 or 3 years old, and often have more of them. These friends seem very real to the child with a great deal of reality confusion and persistent impersonation. The imaginary friend does not always act in the best interest of the child, and the child may be truly unable to remember misbehaviors, blaming it on the imaginary friend. Children ages 3 to 9. Fear of specific things, people, places, objects. Refusing to talk about fears. Nightmares, difficulty sleeping, trouble eating, changes in appetite, food aversion, shame-based behavior, behavior regression, attachment issues, difficulty walking, fearful of specific days, sexualized behavior with ritual themes, hiding, self-preservation begins, passive response to difficult situations, concrete triggers, verbal and visual cues, heightened gag reflex, fear of religious symbols, talking about people in masks or robes, use of ritual phrases in play reenactments. Ritual phrases with children will sound like rhymes. Early signs of dissociation, frequent trance-like states, spacing out or daydreaming, as well as the child reporting that people often become angry or upset with them for unknown reasons. Or the child shows dramatic changes in preferences such as food, games, or clothes, as well as changes in language, accent, or even voice or handwriting.
The child may experience recurrent periods of amnesia or missing blocks of time, such as having no memory of the previous day, which may include denying behaviors that others have personally witnessed the child do. These could be negative behaviors, but may also include behaviors that the child would appear to have little motivation to deny. Additional common signs in children with dissociative identity disorder are having an imaginary friend well into school age, as well as unprovoked rages and violent behavior that may seem to come out of nowhere. I will be discussing dissociative identity disorder in the 5th part of the series. Children ages 9 to 13. Depression, nightmares, eating disorders or food aversion, suicidal thoughts or gestures, self-harm, poor social skills, overly attached or clingy, excessive sexualized behavior, resists removing clothes at appropriate times or layering of clothing, emotional shutdown, hiding, apathetic worldview, reenactment behavior as coping skills, fear of high or ritual days when it begins to get dark, but act normal during the day, talk of people in masks, Bible verses are misquoted. They may talk about things inside them that are watching them, no spiritual identity when asked, secretive about family, absent from school after high days, but most people don't know the high days, so they wouldn't suspect anything. Children ages 13 to 18. Thinks of the body as dirty, repulsive, or bad, difficulty regulating emotions, no sense of safety or attempts at safety are misguided, interpersonal relationships difficult due to trauma response, distorted worldview, impulsive and compulsive behavior related to the abuse or to avoid the abuse, attempting to stay the night at a friend's house on a high day, even though they won't be allowed to do so. Self-harm will involve symbols of the occult or the cult, reenactment of the trauma to gain control, which may present as role playing. People will think that they are morbid with an active imagination, and adults 18 and up. Fear of intimacy or hypersexual, flashbacks, body memories, fear of being in a circle or group of people standing in a circle, aversion to certain meats, or fear of the basement, small rooms, or claustrophobic. And here are some signs at any age. Artwork depicting grids, graves, cyclonic shapes, doodles of circles, occult symbols, or people in robes, masks, bonfires, distorted drawings of Jesus and other spiritual figures and items. To conclude this video, anytime you hear about a person or group of people taking advantage of someone in a spiritual way, that's RA. Religious cults can also be used as fronts for various forms of illegal trafficking. Prevention, rescue, and raising awareness are valuable in fighting human trafficking. However, very few understand the enormity of this topic. It is not secluded to impoverished cities or third world countries. Very few are aware of the reality that trafficking involves wealthy families, celebrities, organized crime, torture, ritualistic abuse, trauma-based mind control, secret societies, religious cults, and government corruption. Extremist cults, covens, organizations, and ideologies are all responsible for RA, which leads to the severe victimization of the subjects. But what about when the brutality is carried out by one's own government? In the next part of this series, we're going to take a look at the CIA and how it executed some of the most inhumane experiments on its own citizens. Thanks for watching part 2. I will see you in part 3.
The best place for creators to make money in the creator economy is Kajabi.
You don't need a huge following to be really successful.
I have 12,000 followers and I'm able to make 6 figures with Kajabi.
For 7 years, I was working undercover as a spy, and I needed to know how to manipulate, how to live and operate without ever being detected, and how to collect secrets.
Okay, I've got so many questions.
Andrew Bustamante.
He's a former CIA officer
who uses spy skills
to teach anyone how to master their minds, talents, and potential in business and everyday life.
When I left CIA, I realized that I could use CIA skills to succeed in business. But one of the first things you should want to learn is how do I know if I'm being lied to? As an example, bad liars. That is one of the biggest tells of an unskilled liar. Next, people have 4 basic core motivations: reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. And if you can speak to somebody through the lens of their ideology, you can get them to do incredible things.
Perception versus perspective. What's that?
90% of the people out there, they're all trapped in their own perception, in thinking emotionally. And emotions are very likely wrong. So CIA trains us to recognize and distrust our perception. And there's 2 really quick things that you can do. Next, SADRAT. It's an acronym. And all of our marketing, all of our human interactions falls into the same SADRAT process that I learned at CIA, because the human condition is so predictable. So SADRAT stands for, and it's the reason my company has grown 300% every year for the last 3 years.
I want to know more. Was there any situations where you felt your life was at risk? What do you think about what's going on at the moment with geopolitics? Do you think we're already engaged in a form of World War III? And then why are you going to try and leave America in 2027? It's absolutely crazy to me that so many of you have decided to watch our show, and so many of you have decided to subscribe to our show. We now have 5 million subscribers on YouTube, which is a number that I just can't comprehend. And it's a dream that I absolutely never could have had. We started the Diary of a CEO just over 3 years ago now. And in my wildest expectations, we might have had 100,000 subscribers by now. So you can imagine how shocked I am that so many of you have chosen to tune into these conversations every week and spend some time with us. So thank you. And I made a deal with you. I made a deal that if you subscribe to this show, that we would continue to raise the bar. And in 2024, we're going to raise the bar like never before. I've been working for the last 9 months on a surprise for all of you that have subscribed to this show, and I'm very excited to deliver that for you. The production's going to change. We're going to go even further with our guests, and we're going to tell even more global stories. So as always, if you appreciate what we're doing here, the simple, free favor I'll ask from you is to hit the subscribe button. Let's get on with the episode. Andrew, you're well known for your time in the CIA because people are so intrigued and compelled by it. How long were you in the CIA?
I was actually in the CIA for a comparatively short period. I was only in for 7 years. Many people make a 30 or more year career out of CIA. So it was really quite a small blip in terms of my overall life. I wore the US military uniform for 7 years before that as well. So 14 years total spent in service to the United States.
And what is the CIA?
So the CIA is the United States' intelligence, foreign intelligence collection platform. Their primary agency deemed with collecting foreign secrets that have any kind of impact in American national security. So if you think about it, there are multiple what's called intelligence agencies in what's known as the intelligence community, or the IC. CIA is just one of those 36-ish community members in the IC. However, it is the one charged with centralizing all of the intelligence collected, hence the Central Intelligence Agency. So it's the hub in a large wheel of intelligence collection.
Is that what a spy is? Is it the same thing as being a spy?
So I'll geek out with you a little bit here because terminology is really very important. So there are spies, and spy is a vernacular that's used in common conversation that doesn't really have a definition in terms of the intelligence or espionage profession. You have handlers, you have assets in terms of traditional espionage. Handlers are officers who collect intelligence. Assets are foreigners who provide intelligence to the handler. So a CIA officer or an MI6 officer, a Mossad officer, an MSS officer, depending on the country, these are officers who collect secrets. They are therefore handlers.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the people who provide them secrets are considered assets. Traditionally speaking, when you talk about a spy, some people think a spy is an asset or a handler, either someone who provides information or someone who collects information.
Okay.
And the term spy is just confusing enough that oftentimes people will project their own opinions on top of that word because they don't understand the real nuance of espionage.
So I thought of a spy as someone that goes to another country and collects information secretly and then sends it back to the country they came from.
So technically that is an intelligence operative,
okay,
or an intelligence officer, also known as an operator, or in media, an operative. Sometimes it's also called an agent, right? An intelligence agent. These are all kind of terms that get nebulous, but what you're describing is a trained intelligence officer. No matter what country you're in, whether you're in, it doesn't matter what intelligence profession you're in either, and there are multiple types of intelligence. There's human intelligence, signals intelligence, measurements intelligence. Anybody who travels to collect secrets on behalf of their country is an intelligence officer.
Is that what you were?
That's what I was.
You started a company after leaving the CIA called Everyday Spy.
Correct.
For someone that's just clicked on this podcast now, who's trying to understand the value that they're going to get from you by understanding the work that you do at Everyday Spy, what are they going to get from this conversation?
This conversation is designed for me, to be able to explain how spy skills have a very real value in breaking everyday barriers. And that's the mission of my company at Everyday Spy. We use spy education to break barriers, social barriers, financial barriers, educational barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers. If there is a barrier in life, I've made it my mission in my company to break that barrier using a proven real world skill or technique from espionage.
And what sort of means is that to what end? So if I'm, the average Joe listening to this now, when you say break barriers, what are those barriers that I'm going to be able to break in my life?
So I intentionally use the term breaking barriers because we all have different barriers. What the reality of life is that we all come into barriers that are similar, but we come into those barriers at different times. For some people, there's a barrier in income that they're born into. For other people, the barrier that they're born into is that they don't have a father. For other people, they come into a financial barrier when they're 18 and they have to leave home. Some people don't ever know financial barriers, but they do know educational barriers because they suffer from dyslexia or they suffer from ADHD. There are people who have barriers that are due to anxiety. The reality is there's really 12 or so barriers that we will all experience in our life, but we will experience them at different times. For some of us, it won't happen until we become parents. For others, it happens as soon as we hit adulthood. The idea is that CIA is extremely familiar with barriers. And what they teach us as officers going through their training programs is not just the details of tradecraft, but it's really to understand that any barrier that we as individuals face, they can get us through. But we can also predict barriers other people will run into. And if you know somebody else's barrier and you understand their barrier better than they do, when you help them through that barrier, they will tell you secrets.
They will tell me secrets. As part of your training to become a CIA officer, you must have learned how to manipulate people. That seems to me, from what I know of spies, pretty foundational to what it is to be a successful spy and to get information from someone else. In this conversation today, are we going to learn how, through your training, you were taught to get information from people and make them do what you wanted them to do?
Yes. And I'll be very frank here. I try to exercise something called radical transparency. If you want to manipulate people, you will learn that from this conversation. If you want to manipulate people, I will teach you how to manipulate people. In just a simple conversation, you can learn those skills. But the thing to understand that's the most important is that whether you want to manipulate or not, others are manipulating you just because you don't know what they're doing, right? The problem with being an intelligence operator is that to achieve the things you have to achieve, you sometimes have to do things that you don't want to do. In being a business owner, what I've discovered is that many business owners struggle because they feel like they have to do things they don't want to do. They feel like they have to be sleazy. They feel like they have to be tricky. They feel like they have to mimic, shyster, bad guy business owners, right? The flip side, if you think of a coin, one side of that coin is manipulation. And that coin has value. Manipulation has value. But the other side of the same coin is motivation. If you can get people to do what they want to do, then you have motivated them. And that is worth just as much as getting people to do what you want them to do, which is manipulating them.
We'll get into all of that, but I want to understand where you came from, because I think this is quite pertinent to both your work as a CIA officer, but also there's really interesting sort of psychological elements to why the CIA chose you that are deep within your childhood story. Going right back to the beginning of your life, what is the most important context we need to understand you?
I think the most important thing to understand from my childhood is that I was raised by my mom. My father died. My father was killed before I was born. He died in a violent crime in California. I didn't know him ever. And my mom had to start life with a newborn son, not just as a single mom, but also as the single mom of a man who was killed in a crime. So it was my mom and my grandma that raised me from very young. My mom is a woman of color. She's Latina. My father was American Indian. So there was an element of racial diversity in 1980 when I was born that also kind of played a role in all of that. And the reason that that's important is not because of what happened in the past. It's because from that foundation, my mom married a Caucasian man who became my stepdad, who became my adopted father as well. And I had to kind of learn how to come of age, or literally come of age, in a household where I didn't know my father. I had a stepdad who was Caucasian with two half sisters who were Caucasian. And my stepdad's whole goal was to just pull my mom as far away from her roots as possible, because he didn't want to deal with all the drama that comes from being part of a Catholic Latin family. And my mom was all for that, but nevertheless, like that was the kind of soup that I came out of.
What were the needs that were going unmet in your life at that point?
You do not ask easy questions, man. So I did not feel loved. Growing up, I did not feel loved. My mother loved me. And I know logically and rationally that she loved me. But my mother was a cold woman. She was focused on career success. She was focused on feminism. She was focused on other things. I as an adult now, my sisters and I often reflect on the fact that we think our mom was the kind of woman that didn't want to be a mom, but it was expected of her to be a mom. So therefore she became a mom. So there wasn't a lot of love. There wasn't a lot of emotional support. There was plenty of academic support. And it was always hard because the academic support came, I think, as a way of making sure that they didn't have to provide the other support. Because if you have an academically successful student who turns 18, they can get the fuck out of the house and you can have your life back. And I think that was the mission for my mom, was just academic success, academic success. Be successful so I don't have to take care of you, because I'm not really good at this whole hugging, loving thing. And I just want you gone. So I feel like that was my mom. My dad and my mom, I think, had a marriage that was based in a common set of objectives, more so than shared love. And they were just kind of pursuing those objectives. And I was fortunate because from that, I was cultivated to be a hardworking academic success. And that led to a full ride scholarship, and that led to, success in other parts of life. But for sure, it left behind a trail of always wondering who loves me in my family. Is love even important in a family? Does it matter? Or am I being too focused on this whole love thing? As an example, I tell this story because it's totally normal to me, but a lot of other people find it surprising. There was a day where my mom pulled me aside. I was having an argument with my stepdad, and I went to my mom looking for support. And I asked her to support me. I was like, do you love me? Right? Do you love me, or do you love dad more? And she looked at me and she was like, of course I love your dad more than I love you, because you're my son. I have to love you. You were born to me. I must love you, but it's a choice to love your dad. So I have to love him more because it's a choice. And for me, I will never forget that conversation. I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. It was so simple and so academic and so clear to her. And it's never been something I could ever actually accept. And even now, as a husband and a father myself, I don't understand how that was logically sound to her. I don't know how you could ever actually prioritize who you love.
All of that, as you've said, as the resulted in your academic success and your focus and all of those kinds of things. But at what cost?
I mean, it makes you kind of fucked up, man. It makes you feel like, first of all, it makes you feel like your secrets are justified. It makes you feel like you must have secrets because there's nobody that you can talk to about certain things. I remember for many years, you can't take your love life to mom and dad. You can't tell them the girl that you think is cute. You can't talk to them about not getting picked to go to the prom dance or anything like that. You can't talk about that with them because they don't care. And you can't trust your sisters. You can't trust your mom. You can't trust your dad. You can't trust the people in your own house. So because you can't trust them and because you can't take certain things to them, you must keep secrets. And since you must keep secrets, you must be allowed to keep secrets. There must be secrets that are totally acceptable that they are also keeping from you. So I grew up in a world where secrets were something that was very normal. And then from that, you start to learn that if secrets are normal, then lying must also be normal and totally acceptable. So there's a level of sociopathy that develops when you feel like you're on your own. And that's something that most people out there who are loners, who have grown up in that world, they learn to understand that there are certain elements of social behavior that are not culturally acceptable, but as long as you don't talk about them, you can practice them. So that's a big part of what I learned personally, was that secrets, how to keep secrets, that secrets are normal, how to lie without being caught, and more importantly, that there is a very real difference between the people who are raised in a world where they trust people, they trust others, and because they trust others, they have a built-in vulnerability, a built-in deficiency of compared to the people who are raised in a world where they don't trust others. Because when you're raised in a world where you don't trust, you can always learn to trust. But when you're raised in a world where you trust first, it's very difficult to train that person to know when to not trust someone else.
How do you feel about that wiring that you have because of that experience?
I mean, it's sad. I'm doing everything in my power to not wire my children the same way that I was wired. So I do believe that there is a faulty wiring that happened. But at the same time, it's been very valuable to me. It's been very productive and valuable in terms of what I've been able to experience, what I've been able to see and do financially, economically, relationally. I benefit and value. And this is a big challenge that I have is as much as I sit here telling friends and like I'm telling you secrets, because this is what happens. We tell people secrets when they trust you. When I share with you the challenges of growing up, it's important to me that I don't sound like I'm complaining or whining because I had a fantastic foundation for success after that. But I defined success in all the ways that I was trained to define success financially, economically, empirically, not based on how I feel internally.
Have you had to do a lot of work to counteract the potential consequences of that wiring as you become an adult and a father and all of those things? It's something I think about a lot. I think I've got my own pretty fucked up wiring, and I'm scared now because I'm on the footsteps of becoming a dad myself. I'm with a partner, been with her for 4 years. We're talking about kids right now, and I think, Jesus Christ, like you almost can foresee that there's a really high possibility I'm going to fuck up as a dad because my brain is wired towards like validation and work, career success, and I'm a bit of a workaholic. And so, have you had to do a lot of work on that?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is you will fuck up as a dad. We will all fuck up as parents. The question is, how big will we fuck them up? And I'm working very hard to make sure that the way that I fuck up my kids is in small ways that they can fix in small ways. But I already know, like, the sins of the father pass on. So I'm just trying to minimize what I pass on that's negative and maximize what I pass on that's positive. The additional layer that is unique to myself and all professional intelligence officers is that when we are recruited into intelligence service, specifically when CIA recruits field operators, it's fairly transparent. They tell you that you were recruited because you are a little fucked up. They tell you that you were recruited because of a certain psychological profile that makes it so that you pragmatically view things like secrets and lies. There's a few different terms. We call it moral flexibility. Depending on the situation, there are some things that I would deem immoral, but to do them in a different situation is totally acceptable. And that's just something that I'm wired to be, that's been wired in me since I was a kid, but CIA understands how to take advantage of that, how to use that in a way that benefits American national security. There's also an element of high performance that comes from being wired a certain way. So there is a tie between childhood trauma and high performance. It's a documented connection, but CIA has learned, as has MI6 and Mossad and all the other intelligence services of the world, they've learned that when you train someone who has just the right amount of childhood trauma high performance, when you get your hands on them at the right time in the right period of their life, they can be trained to become extremely loyal, highly productive field operators that end up spending 30 plus years in service to their nation.
When did they get their hands on you?
They recruited me when I was 27 years old, coming out of the military in 2007. I was looking for whatever the next step was going to be. And that was when I was approached by a CIA recruiter.
I heard that you got a pop-up on your computer screen.
Yeah, back in the day, I was actually applying. I was a nuclear missile officer for the CIA, I was a nuclear missile officer for the Air Force. And a nuclear missile officer in the Air Force controls nuclear ICBMs. So I wore the little ring.
Wait. What's a nuclear ICBM?
So a nuclear ICBM is a nuclear intercontinental ballistic missile. So the large missiles that carry nuclear warheads for mutually assured destruction, nuclear war type of stuff.
So you controlled the nuclear missiles?
I was half of who controlled them. I wore one ring, somebody else wore a different ring, and that was how a nuclear missile got launched.
What does the ring do? So
the ring is a key. On the end of it is a key, and when you get a nuclear code that comes in, the code, you put it into an old school computer system, and the two of you take your key ring and you insert it into the the silo operating system. And then you turn in unison. And when you turn in unison, it launches a nuclear weapon.
How did you get yourself to the point in life at 27 years old where you're holding a nuclear key around your neck?
I would love to say it was a series of good decisions, but it wasn't. I did what I was told. That's how I got there. I did what I was told when I was in high school, and I got good grades. And then my mom told me that the best school of all the universities that chose me, the best school I should go to is the Air Force Academy. So then I accepted a full ride scholarship to the United States Air Force Academy, where I did what I was told, and I graduated as a lieutenant. And then I followed what the Air Force told me to do from there. And they told me to learn how to fly, and then they told me that they needed me to work in nuclear and space weapons instead. So then I went to that school, and I did well at that school, and I ended up just kind of climbing the ladder. I did what I was told, and then
I guess
one day I found myself 100 feet underground, miserable.
Talk to you guys later.
It's a horrible job.
Accent. I'm taking it.
You're so